Hello everyone, this is Dr. Shijun Wang. In today's video, I am going to share with you my tricks on learning the last two movements of Brahms Paganini Piano Variations, Book 1. Variation 13 is such a unique piece. It has only 12 measures. If you count the second ending, first ending, it only has 13 measures. But it's probably one of the hardest pages ever written in piano literature. And why is that? The octave glissando is really a rare phenomenon in piano literature. We might see this in some Beethoven sonatas, but first of all, and sometimes people do that in the concertos by Beethoven, and sometimes people do hands together with skills playing. But this one is specifically for right hand glissandos. I think it's probably one of the few pieces that focused on this aspect of technique. And if you encounter something double thirds, if you encounter big leaps, you might see this in other pieces, in other standard piano repertoire. But here, this is kind of like the etude, Chopin etude opus 10 number 2. After you spend thousands, hundreds of hours learning them, you're set for this one piece that lasts for a minute and a half. You can't really use this technique in other pieces. And I really seriously advise everyone who is interested in learning these sets of variations to learn this first. If you can play this well, then learn the rest. And this is kind of like something you throw ahead of your trip to test if that's something legit for you to study. Okay. When we talk about octave glissandos, I think the first thing you have to check is to see if your right hand is big enough for octave glissando. It takes much bigger than octave span to do octave glissando. I mean, if I can reach tenths very easily, I can play all kind of combination of chords with a tenth, but I cannot really do a tenth glissando because when I have the maximum span, then it makes it so difficult to have this supported, have this hand shape, has the frame of these two intervals stayed here during or supported during the glissando. So I can do the octave one pretty easily because my hand is much bigger than a span of octave. And why is this so hard? I think the reason behind this is quite simple. Kind of like when you ride the bicycle, it's impossible to ride it super slow, right? Unless you're specifically trained, it's hard to ride bicycle in extremely slow tempo. If we don't have the momentum, we will get stuck, right? It's hard to do. It hurts your fingers physically to do it slow. But then we have to do it pretty fast to begin with, but then we didn't really know, the fingers weren't trained for how long the distance are, and also we didn't know how fast we need to go from point A to point B. So I guess the first thing we do is to train our thumbs. So that you do not have the burden of octave at the very beginning. So the thumb actually can help the whole octave shape to learn about the distance. Okay, and then of course, when we get used to this distance, we add the pinky on, and we have to do this in kind of like a fast speed, and we don't need to play these deep, right? If you ever heard people telling you you have to play the glissando very deep, they're probably trying to ruin your hand. Just play to the surface, like that. Just like that. And then here, the very last one is a little longer. And I do this tiny bit slower, and it's actually harder to do it slower. But since now that's the cadence, that's kind of a special treatment. If I play from... Okay, well, good luck learning this one. It took me probably 2 months to finally figure out, and really during these 2 months I suffered a lot. I hurt my pinky, and then finally I got this exactly how much, or was the exact distance to travel from the first note toward the end. And just to keep this in mind, to play this almost is like in the Winter Olympic game, there is this one sport called the curling. I don't know, maybe that's made of stone or some special material, but you push it, and then with the help of your teammate, you're trying to put this stone with its own momentum. Yeah, you have to release from your hand at a certain point, but you're hoping this stone will stop right at this one circle that you can gain scores, you can gain a point if you put this stone inside that pointed area. And you have to really know when to let go. Because you obviously cannot just throw it with the biggest force you have, right? Because you will never stop. Right? You will just go forward. So here, in order to know when to stop, you have to know when to release. You have to know when to let go of the momentum. And that's something I can only ask my students to feel, but I can't really teach them. They have to know, maybe somewhere in the middle they have to stop the release and then release the momentum, so let it just to maybe slow down on its own. But please keep that in mind. Okay. Variation 14. It's a difficult one. It's a long one. It has 7 pages. It's longer than any probably 3 or 4 variations combined. And what can we learn from this? I think Brahms really tried very, very hard to make us, first of all, separate our hands. Left hand, right hand, they do separate jobs, separate projects, but they do it simultaneously. And also, within each hand, he's asking us to break the patterns and make sure between each patterns we don't kind of affect each other. Okay, so the beginning goes like this. And here, left hand or right hand has this 8-note pattern, and then 3 note, and then 3 note. And I would really like to break this into 4-note groups, and then, and within each 4-note groups, nothing difficult, right? Everyone can play G sharp, A, B, C. But the difficult part is, how do you go from this one hand position to the other one without affecting any notes? A very common mistake is our hands are impatient. They're impatient to wait for the last note of the previous group, and then they go too early, or they overlook the last one. Right? They only want to make sure the next group is correct, but here we really need to practice how to play it towards the end. And not to mention right hand actually is having it's a separate technique, and it's a canon. It's a technical canon in between the two hands. And here in measure 10, that's something I've never seen, and it might not sound hard, but I guarantee you this is a lot harder than some of the Liszt transcendental etudes. Right, you go from minor 6 to perfect 4/5 to diminished fifths with a different finger, and you need to do this probably all 3 groups within 1 second. I forgot my right hand. We have to separate our green, we have to separate, and then to separate each technical patterns in a split second. All right, and later on in this variation, it becomes this broken octave. Broken octaves in arpeggiated patterns. And while left hand has 4 note groups, right hand has 2 note groups. So really, this is something we have to know when we play octaves. Is way easier. It's probably more than twice as easy because you have this fixed shape. But here we have to make sure we don't change the fixed shape until we finish this group. And then we move all together. Okay, towards the end, again, Brahms is testing our ability on articulation. This is legato, and when we do legato, we naturally bring a shape. Non-legato. Legato again with a hairpin marked. So while we have so many notes, we have to really know what is the important things that the contrast, what kind of contrast Brahms asks us to bring. And here at the very end, we have still the octave shapes, 2 hands with a leap. So he really puts, it's kind of like when you're holding some weight, he keep putting more weight on the what do you call that? The weight lifting thing. So maybe 10 measures, last 8 measures, these syncopated hands playing octave and chords in such a fast speed, something I don't see very often. So not only we have to pay attention to the accuracy, we also have to pay attention to the correctness of the rhythm. And then the tone, it needs to be super, super deep, right? In many occasions, my Juilliard professor has mentioned the big belly, maybe from drinking beer, and then of course this beer, this grounded feeling of Brahms, and that's 100% shown in the ending of Book 1. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I also hope you guys can start learning this one, right? But don't start until you make sure you can play the last 2 variations. Next week, I am going to continue share with all of you how did I learn the Brahms Paganini Variation Book 2. Thank you for watching. See you next week.